The lighthouse keeper's cottage sat at the edge of the world, perched on a cliff that jutted into the North Atlantic like a defiant fist. For 23 years, Malcolm Hendricks had lived there alone, watching the seasons turn, the storms rage, and the ships pass safely in the night thanks to the beam he kept burning. He didn't mind the solitude. That's what he told himself. Anyway, on the long winter nights when the darkness pressed against the windows and the only sound was the eternal conversation of wind and wave. People had stopped making sense to him long ago, back when his wife left him for a man who didn't smell of fish and lamp oil, back when his daughter stopped writing letters, back when the world decided that automated lights would soon make him obsolete. But the wind understood him. It spoke to him in 1,000 different voices. Sometimes it whispered secrets through the cracks in the window frames, sharing gossip from distant shores. Other times it howled its fury against the lighthouse walls, raging at injustices Malcolm couldn't name but felt in his bones. On gentle days, it would hum soft melodies that reminded him of lullabies his mother sang when the world was young and kind. Malcolm had learned to answer. Storm coming from the northwest. He'd say, standing on the narrow gallery that circled the lighthouse, feeling the wind's urgent tugs at his weathered jacket. I know, old friend. I'm ready. And he would prepare, securing loose equipment, double-checking the light mechanism, laying in extra firewood for the stove. The wind never lied to him. It couldn't. Unlike people, the wind was honest in its nature, whether gentle or violent, predictable or wild. Fuck the letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, brought by the supply boat that came twice monthly. Young Danny Morrison, the captain's son, handed it over with an awkward expression that Malcolm had learned to recognize as pity. Looks official? Danny said, lingering at the door longer than necessary, as if waiting for Malcolm to invite him in for tea. But Malcolm just nodded his thanks and closed the door. The wind rattled the letter in his hand, trying to snatch it away. Not yet, Malcolm murmured. Let me read it first. The Department of Maritime Safety regretted to inform him that his position would be terminated in 60 days. The new automated system had been installed and tested successfully. His pension would be adequate. They thanked him for his years of service. Housing would need to be vacated. Standard bureaucratic language, cold and efficient as clockwork. Malcolm set the letter on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The wind pressed against the windows, concerned, questioning. He rose and opened the door, stepping out onto the rocky promontory where spray occasionally reached even at this height. They're sending me away, he said to the wind. The wind swirled around him, confused, indignant. It picked up dried leaves and spun them in anxious circles. It pulled at his hair, his clothes, as if trying to anchor him to this place. I know, Malcolm said. I don't want to go either. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the wind search the cottage, room by room, looking for answers in corners and cupboards. It found none. Neither did he. The memories came unwelcome in the days that followed, carried on the wind like seeds finding purchase in untended soil. He remembered his wedding day, 26 years past, when Rebecca had smiled at him with such hope in her eyes. They were going to build a life together, she'd said. Instead, he'd built a wall of silence around himself, brick by brick, until she couldn't reach him anymore. The isolation she'd imagined as romantic became suffocating. The lighthouse that had seemed like an adventure became a prison. I can't breathe here, Mal, she'd said the day she left. There's nothing here but you and your damned light and this endless, empty ocean. There's the wind, he'd replied stupidly, and she'd looked at him as if he were already lost. Their daughter, Emma, had been 12 then. She'd cried and begged to stay with him, but Rebecca had been firm. You need to be around people, sweetheart. Real people. Normal life. Emma was 30 now, married to a banker in Boston with 2 children Malcolm had never met. She'd sent photos once years ago, but the wind had taken them off the table and scattered them. He'd never asked for new ones. The wind moaned through the lighthouse gallery, a sound of mourning. It knew these thoughts pained him, but it couldn't offer solutions, only company in his grief. We're the same, you and I, Malcolm told it one gray afternoon. Just passing through, touching things but never holding them. 3 weeks before his termination date, a storm rolled in with unusual ferocity. The wind came first, as it always did, bringing warnings days in advance. This would be a bad one, it said in its frantic rushing. Dangerous. Deadly, perhaps. Malcolm prepared methodically, though he wondered why it mattered anymore. The automated light would take over soon. They didn't need him. But habits formed over 2 decades were hard to break, and somewhere deep in his chest, he still felt responsible for the ships that passed his station. The storm hit at midnight, transforming the world into chaos. Rain came horizontal, driven by winds that screamed their fury. Waves crashed against the cliff with the sound of artillery. Malcolm checked the light every hour, making sure it burned true through the maelstrom. At 3 in the morning, the wind brought him a different sound, the desperate horn of a ship in distress. Malcolm rushed to the gallery, fighting the wind to push open the door. Through the rain and spray, he spotted the ship, a mid-sized cargo vessel being pushed toward the rocks by the storm. They were fighting hard, engines churning, but the wind and current were stronger. The automated system couldn't help them. It could only shine the light. But Malcolm knew these waters, knew the currents and the hidden rocks, knew the safe channels that didn't appear on any chart. He stumbled back inside, soaked and chilled, and grabbed the marine radio. The ship's captain was shouting instructions to his crew, voice tight with fear. Malcolm pressed the transmit button. "Cargo vessel off Hendricks Point. This is the lighthouse keeper. Cut your engines to half, turn 15 degrees starboard, and let the current take you, trust me." "Who is this?" the captain demanded. "Someone who knows these waters. Do it now, or you'll break apart on the rocks." There was a pause. Then, "All right. Going to starboard now?" Malcolm stood at the window watching. The wind pressed against his back, urging him on, adding its voice to his guidance. For the next 40 minutes, he talked the ship through the storm, reading the water the way he'd learned to read the wind, feeling the pull of currents he couldn't see but knew were there. When the vessel finally cleared the danger zone and headed into open water, the captain's voice came through again, thick with emotion. "Thank you, lighthouse keeper. You saved 17 lives tonight just doing my job," Malcolm replied, then realized with a hollow feeling that this wasn't his job anymore. In 3 weeks, there would be no one here to guide lost ships through storms. Just a light, burning with mechanical precision, ignorant of the subtleties that separated life from death in these waters. The wind swirled around him as he sat down heavily at the kitchen table, exhausted. It seemed subdued now, thoughtful. They'd done something good together, one last time. 2 days after the storm, as Malcolm was packing his few possessions into boxes, he heard the supply boat's horn. It wasn't scheduled to come for another week. He walked down to the small dock to find Danny Morrison securing the lines, and beside him, a woman in her 30s with dark hair shot through with premature gray. Her face was familiar in a way that made his heart seize. "Emma?" His daughter looked up at him, and he saw tears in her eyes. "Hi, Dad." They stared at each other across 10 feet of space that felt like an ocean. The wind circled them both, curious, cautious. "The shipping company called me," Emma said. "They tracked me down somehow, told me what you did during the storm. They're making a formal complaint about the automated system, saying there should always be a human keeper on duty." Malcolm shook his head. "That won't change anything. The decision's made." "Maybe." Emma took a step forward. "But I realized something when they called. I realized I didn't even know you were being forced to leave. I didn't know anything about your life. And that's not okay, Dad. I'm sorry." The wind gusted suddenly, wrapping around them both, and Malcolm felt something break loose in his chest, a frozen thing he'd carried for years. "I'm the one who should apologize," he said. "I pushed everyone away, your mother. You. I thought I was fine alone, but I was just afraid." Emma finished. "Mom told me before she died. Did you know that? She died 2 years ago, Dad. Cancer. I sent you a letter." Malcolm felt the world tilt. "I never." The wind must have taken it. He realized how insane that sounded, blaming the wind for his own isolation. But Emma just nodded sadly. "You have grandchildren?" she said. "Thomas is 8. Sarah is 5. They'd like to meet you, if you'd want to meet them." The wind swirled between them, uncertain now, sensing a threat to the solitary existence it had helped Malcolm maintain. But Malcolm barely noticed. He was looking at his daughter, really looking at her for the first time in years, seeing Rebecca in her eyes and his own loneliness reflected back at him. "I'd like that," he whispered. "I'd like that very much." The last day arrived too quickly. Malcolm walked through the lighthouse one final time, touching the worn brass fixtures, the logbook where he'd recorded 23 years of watches, the lens that had cast its saving light across countless dark nights. The wind followed him, room to room, increasingly agitated. It had never known a world without Malcolm in this place, and it didn't know what to do with his absence. "I have to go," Malcolm told it. "Emma's waiting at the dock. I'm going to Boston. There's an apartment near her house. I'll see my grandchildren. Maybe I'll learn how to talk to people again." The wind shrieked, rattling the windows. It was angry now, feeling betrayed. How could he abandon their friendship? How could he choose people over the honest, true companionship they'd shared for so long? Malcolm stood on the gallery for the last time, looking out at the ocean he'd watched for 2 decades. The wind tore at him, trying to hold him back. "You were never really my friend," he said quietly. "You were my excuse, my justification for hiding. I told myself I preferred your company, but the truth is, I was just afraid. Afraid of being hurt again. Afraid of failing. Afraid of being vulnerable with people who might leave." The wind howled its protest. "But people do leave," Malcolm continued, tears running down his weathered face. "That's part of being human. They leave, they die, they change. It hurts. But you know what hurts more? Realizing that I've been dead for years and didn't even know it. Existing, but not living. Surviving, but not being part of anything real." He turned to face the lighthouse, this stone tower that had been his entire world. "My daughter came back. Against all odds, despite my neglect, she came back. And I have a choice now. I can stay here with you, in this comfortable, safe isolation, until they drag me away, or I can choose life, messy and painful and uncertain as it is." The wind softened, becoming just a breeze. In its whisper, Malcolm thought he heard something like understanding, or maybe permission, or maybe just goodbye. "Thank you," he said to the air, "for keeping me company when I needed it, for being here when I had no one else. But I need to go now, I need to try." The breeze circled him one last time, gentle as a caress, then moved away across the water, racing toward some distant horizon where it would find other lonely souls who needed a friend. Malcolm picked up his suitcase and walked down the path toward the dock, toward Emma's waving figure, toward a future he couldn't predict or control. Behind him, the automated light flickered to life, beginning its eternal, programmed vigil. But for the first time in 23 years, Malcolm didn't turn back to check it. Malcolm sat in Emma's backyard, watching Thomas chase Sarah around the oak tree while their laughter rang out like bells. The wind stirred the leaves overhead, and Malcolm felt it pause, as if recognizing an old acquaintance. "Hi," he said softly, so the children wouldn't hear. The wind rustled in reply, friendly but distant now. They were no longer dependent on each other, merely two beings sharing a moment of recognition. Emma came out with lemonade, sitting beside him on the bench. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," Malcolm said, and realized it was true. "I was just thinking about the lighthouse." "Do you miss it?" Malcolm considered. He missed the simplicity, sometimes the clear purpose. But he didn't miss the loneliness, the self-imposed exile. "No," he said. "Not really." Thomas ran up to them, breathless and grinning. "Grandpa, will you tell us a story? Mom says you used to live in a lighthouse." Malcolm looked at his grandson, at Emma, at Sarah peeking around the tree trunk. The wind whispered through the leaves, encouraging him. "I did live in a lighthouse," Malcolm said. "And I learned something important there." "What?" Thomas asked. "That the light we shine for others is what keeps us from getting lost ourselves." The wind sighed through the tree's content before moving on to other places, other stories, other lonely souls who might need a friend until they learned how to find real ones. And Malcolm, surrounded by his family, felt more found than he had in years.